Hey everyone, welcome to this first part of 22 talks on the text Meditations on the Tarot, a Journey into Christian Hermeticism. This is part one, which is in short a sort of introduction, as well as being the first full part on the first card of the tarot deck, the Magician. So with the majority of my talks, interviews, and discussions, as you'll know, I like to keep the context of the work, the discussion at hand, within the bounds of its own understanding, of its own context, without really drawing in historical data or stuff that's come to light since, which is going to really eschew it and turn it into our own thing. So that is, I often find it somewhat sort of suspect to attempt to understand a text outside of the constraints and thoughts of its own author, which of course is itself a sort of precarious thing to say. But however, the reason I'm saying this is because in this case, the author of this text is anonymous. The author of the text is anonymous, and he's made this sort of clear, and there's reasons for this. And so with philosophical works, this of course is a matter of sort of philosophy itself and just the philosophy on its own bands, within its own bounds and its own point of philosophy. But with more spiritual works, such as the Meditations on the Tarot, this seems to me to be a little different as to why I'd sort of need to mention this. So the author, per their own context, they specifically mention this, is anonymous. The afterword of the text states, the author wished to remain anonymous in order to allow the work to speak for itself, to avoid the interposition of any kind of personal element between the work and the reader, reasons that we respect. However, it's widely understood, I will add this in just because you can very quickly look this up now, though I don't think it's entirely confirmed, though it's generally understood and suspected that the actual author of the book is Valentin Tomberg, but as per the instructions of the text's own context, I wish to accept that piece of data as being understood via the author's original instructions, and to say not that it's specifically unimportant, but that we don't need it, right? The text is its own thing, its own meditation, and really we should respect that. And so in the way in which I'm sort of dealing with the text, I mean, I'll draw on my own esoteric knowledge and spiritual knowledge, but as much as I can, I'd like to keep the text within the text sort of itself, if that makes sense. So we basically move in without too much biographical exposition, as you'd imagine. What is the Meditations on the Tarot? So the full title, Meditations on the Tarot, a Journey into Christian Hermeticism, Letters to Unknown Friends on the 22 Major Arcana. From here on out, I will just refer to the text as the Meditations or Meditations. It's roughly a 700-page text, originally written in French in 1967, published posthumously in 1980, with an English translation arriving in 1985 by Robert A. Powell. And this is the translation we're still using today. I'm using the expanded and revised edition by Angelico Press, which is published in 2019. And for those watching this, that is the one on the right, and this one here, which is quite a tomb of a text. And you can certainly hear it hit the floor as it comes through the letterbox. The author is clearly Catholic, though, as you'll see going forward, they draw on so much esoteric knowledge, it really is quite astounding. And arguably, this really isn't necessarily of importance, as they are just drawing on all these different mystical traditions into a sort of Christian perennialism or Christian Hermeticism, as per the title. But, you know, there's some strange oddities around the text. The fact that Hans von Balthasar, one of the preeminent Catholic theologians of the 20th and 21st century, wrote a afterword for the text. And so it is sort of accepted as a Christian spiritual text, which really is in keeping with more dogmatic traditions in a way. So the work is divided into 22 chapters called Letters to Unknown Friends, as the subtitle says. And modern editions often have this foreword by the author and an afterword by the theologian Balthasar, as I've said. Each chapter is centered on a card from the Major Arcana of the Tarot of Marseille. Now, if you don't know what these terms mean, don't worry, I will go into them. With each letter or meditation acting as a symbolic springboard to discuss spiritual growth. And as one can imagine, as per the title, the text itself primarily, though arguably it really does go all over the shop, is a fusion of ancient Egyptian Hermeticism, or Hermeticism in general, relating to the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus, and Christianity. And now, before I go into the text's first meditation, which is on the magician, I'd like to give just a very brief history of the Tarot of Marseille. So, what I mean by that is tarot, or the tarot, is a pack of playing cards originating in use from at least the mid-15th century, being utilised originally to just play games, tarot games, throughout Europe, such as Italian tarocchini, French tarot, and Austrian Konigrufen. And so, for those that don't, one of the common misconceptions about tarot now, in terms of this idea of the arcana, is people may misconstrue tarot as simply the cards that we've understood to be the picture cards of the tarot, the moon, the tower, the magician, etc. Whereas original tarot playing card packs were a full deck of normal cards with suits and numbers with the additional tarot cards. And now, of course, you can buy them separately because tarot packs have more famously and more specifically just become to be used in the more spiritual senses. And it wasn't really until the 18th century that tarot decks started to be used for these purposes, for divination, for card reading, and for so-called occult purposes. Of course, I'm not a big fan of that word because it does simply mean hidden. And of course, as I say, they are more commonly understood for this today. Each suit has 14 cards, 10 numbering from 1 or ace to 10 cards numbering from 1 or ace to 10, plus 4 face cards, king, queen, knight, and jack. And then each tarot has a separate 21 card trump suit and a single card known as the Fool. These 22 cards are known in divinatory circles as the Major Arcana, and they are the reference points for each meditation of this text. Meditations on the 22 Major Arcana of the Tarot. Though such terms as Major and Minor Arcana wouldn't really be used in relation to tarot games, and only in relation to the more spiritual uses, as one can imagine, which is why it's common to get packs of cards that are just the Arcana, right? Okay, because otherwise you've got these 40 cards that you don't need because you just go buy a pack of playing cards. Firstly, let's quickly overview the title in full, because it's a big title if you take the full thing. And it really just addresses everything that's going on in the book if we do that. Meditations on the Tarot, a journey into Christian Hermeticism, letters to unknown friends on the 22 Major Arcana. Okay, so meditations on the tarot specifically meaning that one is not solely meant to think or study or simply analyze these ideas, but they are meant to meditate on them in the sense of contemplation, in the tradition of contemplation, the ideas which are encapsulated in each arcana, the tower, the magician, the fool. You're meant to meditate on these ideas, on the deeper picture. The tarot in question is the Tarot of Marseille. There's different tarot packs throughout history, and most famously the original tarot pack is the Tarot of Marseille, and then you have the Rider-Waite, and then you have the Thoth, which was created by Crowley, etc. Not really going to look into those at all because we are just dealing with this one. So a journey, right? A journey with its implication of a long process and not a question of events, right? There's sort of a struggle involved in a journey. A meditation and contemplation really is involved in a spiritual struggle to get to the truth of a matter, to the truth and the bottom of a symbol. Christian Hermeticism, denoting the synthesis of both Christianity and the works of Hermes Trismegistus, as found primarily within the Emerald Tablet. And as per the translator's foreword, such Hermeticism is here begun to be understood not in a differential sense to Christianity as some sort of spooky occult thing that we should avoid, but as a precursor to the foundational events of Christ, and the somewhat accepted idea or understood idea that paganism and different spiritual paths prior to Christ were really these attempts to get close to the truths prior to revelation. And as with all that came before the coming of Christ, is found anew in relation to the teachings and life of Christ. So everything that came before it then quite aptly has actually an intellectual and spiritual rebirth in relation to the revealed truth of Christ. Letters, each letter being a singular meditation on one single major arcana, which are addressed to an unknown friend. And this is the only bit that you might think, well, what does that mean? But and this is an idea the author specifically expounds as meaning someone who will read the letters and acquire definite knowledge via experience of meditative reading. Someone who's really going to take it seriously, an unknown friend, a friend as in someone who is alongside them in this pursuit of spiritual knowledge and truth. And the author goes on to state, for these are in essence 22 spiritual exercises, by means of which you, dear unknown friend, will immerse yourself in the current of the living tradition and thus enter into the community of spirits who have served it and who are still serving it. So, with that out of the way, we can move into the first major arcana, which is the first major arcanum of the tarot, the magician, or Le Batlia. Okay? And the author begins with some quotations from the Gospels and also from St. John of the Cross. The wind blows where it wills, and you hear the sound of it, but you do not know whence it comes or whither it goes. So it is with everyone who is born of the Spirit. That's John 3:8. And from St. John of the Cross, in his The Dark Night of the Soul, into this happy night, in secret see of none, nor saw I aught without other light or guide, save that which in my heart did burn. These two quotations for the author are the key to opening the door to comprehension of the first major arcana, the magician, which itself is the key to all the other major arcana. So the magician as the first arcana is the key to everything else. And in talking of a key, the author is alluding to the arcana as authentic symbols which can be opened, symbols which open ideas, which open sentiments, which open aspiration. They are more than just intellectual functions. They are mental, psychic, and moral operations. Okay, and such operations are to be approached in contemplation. And in referring to St. John of the Cross's Dark Night, the author is alluding to that accomplished solitude one needs as a reservation of contemplation when approaching symbols. So this isn't a text to be approached. I mean, the author is making this blindingly clear from the beginning that it's not a text to be approached merely intellectually. Of course you could. There is an absolute wealth of spiritual knowledge in this book, but to approach it simply and yes, quite literally simply and merely intellectually is to not do justice to the sort of authentic symbolism which is tucked away within these symbols. And so the major arcana are not allegories in the sense of a representation of a truth, a representation of truth, nor are they secretive in the manner of that they are somehow retained for a personal motive. They are authentic symbols, ones which are revealed according to the depth of the meditation, according to that sort of growth and intensity and level and quality of solitude one has obtained in relation to their own personal spiritual growth and solitude and the depth they may go to meditate on these symbols. Okay, secrets are not arcanum. Okay, arcanums allow fertility in relation to the rendering of new ideas. For if one is poor in spirit, one understands one needs the help of such ferment as a means to help them. Contrary to such active, fermenting, fertile pursuits of spiritual progress is self-complacency. Okay, so when to be poor in spirit basically is to understand one needs such help. Okay, to be rich is to understand that you have everything that you need, that you have this wealth, that you have an abundance which is apparently afforded to you. That's what it means to be rich. To be poor in spirit is to understand that you don't have, that you need help, that you need something higher, that you need this spiritual guidance of a sort. And it's a position of spiritual and intellectual and personal humility in relation to one's own growth. And really one needs to be consistently poor throughout their life and never to fall into that trap of thinking that they've acquired or that they own. to be like children as we approach the Lord is to constantly understand that you are learning, that you are growing, and never to enter into some sort of intellectual complacency. And yet, just as the Arcanum is superior to the secret, so too is the mystery superior to the Arcanum. Okay, so the author states, the mystery is more than a stimulating ferment. It is a spiritual event comparable to physical birth or death. That's what the mystery is, and this is on page 4. And it's quite distinctly and superiorly then a change of consciousness. The 7 sacraments here are understood as 7 prismatic colours of the white light of a single mystery known as the second birth. We can speak of a new man, of a rebirth, of a second coming even. But this idea of a mystery as this spiritual event. And the author here really is referring to John 3 and 3 to 8. So, and here, and I will read it in its full. John, Jesus replied, "Truly, truly, I tell you, no one can see the kingdom of God unless he is born again." "How can a man be born when he is old?" Nicodemus asked. Can he enter his mother's womb a second time to be born?" Jesus answered, "Truly, truly, I tell you, no one can enter the kingdom of God unless he is born of water and the Spirit. Flesh is born of flesh, but spirit is born of the Spirit. Do not be amazed that I said, you must be born again. The wind blows where it wishes. You hear its sound, but you do not know where it comes from or where it is going. So it is with everyone born of the Spirit." So here in this book, and the way this author is understanding this, no one initiates the other in this. The great sacrament, there is only one initiator, and that is, for the author, the master from above. We could call them God. There is only one initiator in terms of that idea of God's will, giving over to God's will, and an initiation which can only come from the Lord himself. There are no more masters, lower M, only one master, capital M. And in this respect, each becomes his own master, and each of each other, and yet all under the master from above. And so all help each other in their own singular initiation, which can only come from one Lord. And thus, the art of learning becomes really one's sole initiator. It becomes of paramount importance. Be it natural, ascetical, mystical, historical, philosophical, theological, traditional, or even practical, the art of learning in relation to this one master, in relation to this community of everyone, is the ground of fertility for the initiation towards this change of consciousness, towards this rebirth, for everything to really take root and grow. And it is from the authentic symbols of the Arcana which this art of learning has become mastered, or can become mastered. It is in this meditation on these symbols, on the deeper realities of authentic symbols, that this art of learning really begins to take place. And in this manner, the title of master, lower M, is even further removed, as each becomes no longer any master of learning, but a servant of that which is afforded to him and sought from above. They no longer have possession and enter into a relationship with humility in relation to the above and what can be learned by those around them communally. They guard no secrets, and this is where we really can begin to see why this idea of the difference between arcanums, mysteries, and secrets, and them being not secrets. There's no guarding. They only seek to preserve the soul of religion, science, and art. And so in this, to just encapsulate what's going on so far, in this art of learning in relation to the meditations on the tarot, on authentic symbols, as a communally beneficial task of understanding and helping each other's and our own initiation in relation to the only master there can ever be, the only Lord there can ever be, there can be no secrets. There is only an allowing, an opening, and an helping in relation to growth, spiritual growth, and learning. And so the author here heads into a digression concerning Peter and John. And the author consistently heads into digressions in relation to Christian theology, Christian history, and scripture. And Peter is, for the author, and also symbolically represents the leader, the head of the church. Matthew 16:18, and I say also unto thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. But as the head of the church, mind, head, body and heart, etc., Peter is he, as the head, who makes decisions. He chooses. But the heart, John, guards the body and the soul of the church until the second coming. Both are critically needed, Peter and John, the head and the heart, in relation to the whole. And from the position of guarding, the author understands the living Hermetic tradition as guarding all true culture. They do not direct, nor are they agents in the case of John, but they are here to serve the current and the culture of religion, art and science. And in this manner, Hermeticism, for the author, he quotes, is a ferment, that is to say, the antecedent of the mystery of the second birth or the great initiation. It's this sort of guarding force of religion, art and science, and he consistently refers to these three as sort of a triune backbone to culture, whilst consistently drawing on Christianity as a means to understand the further revelation of truths. And so that brings us to the question of this first talk, really, and ultimately this first Arcanum, the magician, well, the first major Arcanum, the magician. What is it exactly that we have before us? Now, the author gives his own description, but for those watching, there is an image of it there, and for those listening, I will go over the description. So, of course, at the top we have the numeral I, the Roman numeral I, as in denoting one, and at the bottom we have the name Le Batlia, the magician. But the author, on page 7, we have a young man wearing a large hat in the form of a lemniscate, standing behind a small table on which are arranged a yellow painted vase, 3 small yellow discs, another 4 red discs in 2 piles, each divided down the middle by a line, a red beaker with 2 dice, a knife withdrawn from its sheath, and lastly a yellow bag for carrying these various objects. Now, the images of the Tarot of Marseilles are, of course, they have changed a little over the years. So to find the exact one that this author may have been using proves quite difficult. And the one that I've allowed is the one that you will commonly find. And so we'll use that as a pictorial reference, but we will also use the author's description. And so he also, this young man, or the magician on the card, he also has a rod in his right hand and a yellow object or a ball in his left. Both are held with ease. His gaze is elsewhere. There is no tension or haste in his body. So we are presented in the entirety with a magician, a man of tricks. We are to enter into this game of tarot, and our first Arcanum is a trickster of sorts. And so there's a lot going on here. How are we to understand this? And so the author understands this in 2 sentences as this. The first Arcanum, the principle underlying all the other 21 major arcana of the tarot, is that of the rapport of personal effort and of spiritual reality. And that's on page 7. If one does not take hold of this idea, and thus this card, all else is really lost. The magician reveals the method. He is the Arcanum of the Arcana. He reveals what is needed in order to enter into the mystery school of exercises. In fact, the first and fundamental principle of esotericism, i.e. of the way of experience of the reality of the spirit, can be rendered by the formula: learn at first concentration without effort. Transform work into play. Make every yoke that you have accepted easy and every burden that you carry light. That's page 7 to 8. So what is being discussed here at first is active relaxation, or effort without effort. This begins with the accepted idea that from all schools and esoteric path, that the key to beginning is concentration. It is the removal of one's distractions, or oneself in a way, or one's thoughts, one's direction, from the oscillation, from hypnotism, from automatism, into a concentration which for the author is to be found within calm and silence, itself at the expense of automatism, which is primarily in thought and imagination. The Pythagoreans, for instance, prescribed 5 years of silence to beginners, for all begins with silence, which grows into knowing, then will, then daring. To speak belongs only to those who know what it is they are saying, and not doing so solely from imagination and from automatism. Such people have developed a practice of interior and exterior silence. And so to begin, and you'll see this anywhere, in any spiritual tradition, is to be silent and is to develop concentration and attention. And here we distinguish between two types of concentration: disinterested concentration and interested concentration. The former, disinterested concentration, is conducted from a will which is free from the passions, free from enslavement, or in the terminology of Gurdjieff, free from identification. The latter, interested concentration, is the result of a domination, of an identification, of an attachment or an obsession. A monk in prayer and a bull in a rage both are concentrated, and yet one is dominated and the other is not. Thus, true concentration is a free act. It's unidentified. One cannot truly concentrate if their will is elsewhere, is attached to something, is tethered. If it is controlled and understood by way of understanding what we have already spoken of, silence. This effort without effort, this disinterested concentration can only happen within silence. A will which is truly concentrating is one which is silent. But what of effort without effort then? And concentration without effort? How does this make sense? The author takes the example of a tightrope walker. Clearly he is entirely concentrating on his act, for his life is at stake. And yet, do we think he is calculating? Imagining? Reflecting on what he is doing? No, of course not. His will is silent, and in relation to his singular task, he has suppressed all oscillations of the mental substance. The author states, it is the intelligence of his rhythmic system which replaces that of his brain during his acrobatic exercises, on page 9. The intelligence of the head no longer matters. Concentration is transposed from typical mental intelligence to that of the rhythmic system, from mind to will. And for those that are aware of the fourth way and the work of Gurdjieff and many others who have systems like this, Rudolf Steiner is another example, we can think again of the splitting of the human being into the mind, the intelligence, the emotions, and the body. And we could think of walking a tightrope, or we could think of riding a bike. When you first ride a bike, you have to learn to do it. You have to use your intelligence in relation to your body, and you also have to bring in your emotions to stop yourself getting annoyed. But eventually, you learn to ride a bike and your physical center takes over. It knows its job. And at that point, same with driving a car, to then try think about doing that act would be entirely wrong. And the same holds for the tightrope walker. He isn't thinking about what he's doing. It's effort without effort. It's concentration without effort. And so we return to our image of the magician and to his hat, presented to us in the form of a lemniscate. That is the symbol of infinity, itself a symbol of rhythm, circulation and respiration. It is of eternity and eternal rhythm. Concentration without effort, then, is the descension of concentration, in reality, ascension. From brain to rhythmic system. So, the intelligence of the mind descending to the rhythmic system of something more unified and harmonious, which in itself spiritually is an ascension. Concentration is no longer hindered. It has found the silence it needed to be able to concentrate effortlessly. So concentration without effort, wherein within its descension, spiritual ascension, to its correct work within the rhythmic system, becomes as natural as breathing. And people who know how to drive a car, ride a bike, will understand this. A profound silence of all desire, imagination, identification and attachment, etc. All waters are calmed to a stillness, wherein depth can be found. A depth which resonates a silence which is found in the affirmative, a silence which one can somehow take in, a silence that one can work with, that one can even listen to. At first, it is a quarter of an hour's silence, such as this, and then one begins to grow, and they grow more towards a silence which keeps being digested and itself keeps digesting. You are imbued in this active silence. And from here, the author states that we can move to transforming work into play. And one can see here, quite subtly, though not all that subtle, the first exercise, which is tactically mentioned earlier on. Because he says about these exercises, but we can't exactly see them. At first, it is a quarter of an hour's silence. Maybe there is an exercise in there. Because of course he's now saying we can move on. But what have we moved on from? Anyway, transforming work into play. Beginning from this zone of silence which we've grown, and which we understand to a certain degree, and which we are actively within, and developed over the long term, work is removed from the imposition of duty and transformed into a sweetness, a play which works together with the soul. A work become play, whereby in such silence one is never alone. They are connected to something higher, to higher forces, to God even. These two parts culminate into the experience of the third part of the formula. Make every yoke that you have accepted easy, and every burden that you carry light. Silence is the sign of real contact with the spiritual world. All this, so far, is the foundation of mysticism and esotericism. Thus, to return to the symbolism of the card, if one wishes to practice esotericism in this manner, they must be or become the magician. To concentrate without effort, to act with perfect calm. It is a oneness of the self, and a oneness, a silence, in relation to the spiritual, an act from self, performed in silence as a unity between the two. The flesh and the divine, the higher within the lower, the vertical within the horizontal. Concentration is found of all, of unity, of oneness, and thus of knowledge. Silence, concentration, and a harmony between two not so opposing sides that both need each other. The governance of the unity is afforded to us, revealed, by the world, is understood by the author by the quandary that the unknown must have a relationship with the known. The unknown must have a relationship with the known. The above must have a relationship with the below. For if not, then in the sense of its absolute strangeness, the possibility of a unity or harmony between all would be impossible. And such a unity can be understood by something which can seem a little complex at first, which the author calls the method of analogy, but others may call it the law of analogy. So, the author states on page 12, since at the root of the diversity of phenomena their unity is found, at the root of the diversity of phenomena their unity is found, in such a way that they are at one and the same time different and one, they are neither identical nor heterogeneous, but are analogous, insofar as they manifest their essential kinship. The formula of analogy is well known to all who have perused the esoteric, and the author refers to the second verse of the Emerald Table, or some would know it as the Emerald Tablet. On page 13, he states, that which is above is like to that which is below, and that which is below is like to that which is above, to accomplish the miracles of the one thing, or as we would commonly know it now, as above, so below. He continues this method of analogy and applies it not simply to all that exists in space, as is the case with that prior quote, but above and below. These are spatial determinations, but also in time. That which was is as that which will be, and that which will be is as that which was, to accomplish the miracles of eternity. So we have space and time, both covered by this unification of diversity as a oneness, as a harmony. In space, and here the author is moving into our means of understanding both these, the spatial, above and below, and the temporal, as behind, as in front, as behind, future as the past, past as the future. So forms of symbolism that the author is bringing in for us to be able to understand these. So in space, this is the basis of typological symbolism. Symbols expressing correspondence or communication between prototypes above and their manifestations below. As above, so below. Typological symbolism. In time, we're dealing with mythological symbolism between archetypes of the past and their manifestations in the present. The magician is a prototype of the man of spirit, whereas Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel are, if you like, mythological symbols of archetypes manifesting themselves throughout history. And for those that are watching, there is this small diagram just to understand it. But for those listening, it's simply that the past and the future are mythological time, and that's how that form of symbolism is how we are going to begin to understand that. And above and below are spatial, understood spatially in relation to typological time. Typological symbolism. So simply two forms of symbolism. Spatial, above and below. Mythological, archetypes of the past manifesting in the future. The author emphasizes that these two forms of symbolism are often mixed up, whereby typological symbols are mistaken for mythological archetypes. This happens quite commonly, but if you think through the symbology that you're looking at, you'll see where they sit and what then. Is it dealing with the eternity, or is it dealing with manifestations within the vertical? And of course, it seeks to emphasize that in relation to the fact that this diagram, this crossing of the up and the down and the horizontal is understood theologically as the cross. Okay, so to just divert my own small amount of knowledge, spiritual knowledge here, the idea of the cross, of the crucifix, of the vertical, of the ascension of man's spiritual growth, and the horizontal of the passing of time, of the material world. And of course, the cross is the very striking symbol and reality of the fact that we need both. You have to have one, you have to be in the other, and you shouldn't really, though I don't want to position myself in any mandatory way of telling people what to do or what not to do, shouldn't really be in too much of one. To be a man of the world, to be of the devil's kingdom, so to speak, to be fully in that horizontal and in a way autonomous and lost to the material world, that's one thing. But then to be too spiritual to avoid the reality that is in front of you in the world is equally a problem. And so there's this balancing act between these two, this intersection. So, after a long digression of examples of symbols gone wrong, the author delves further into the complexities of this method of analogy, and strangely enough, he cites Keynes, John Maynard Keynes, the economist, in reference to logic and philosophy. In short, he states, 1. For the inductive method, for those that don't know, inductive reasoning is a method of reasoning in which a body of observations is synthesized to come up with a general principle. So if this is this and this is this, then this is this. So for the inductive method to work, objects need to be classified. If this is A and this is B, and then we can work with the classifications in relation to an induction. This presupposes the analogy of objects to be classified. So 2, argument from analogy is a special type of inductive argument whereby perceived similarities are used as a basis to infer some further similarity that is yet to be observed. This can constitute the basis of a hypothesis. So Laplace, for instance, saw in the analogy of planets circling the sun and satellites, that is comets, circling the Earth and planets around their axis, and manifested the analogy of their origin. Okay. For instance, another example of analogy is the idea that, for instance, when the stomach is doing, in a certain sense, the same things as the lung is doing. The lung is taking in air, it's digesting it to remove this nutrient thing we call oxygen, and that's then going into the body to build us up in a way, or fuel us. And the stomach is doing the same thing. And so you end up with this same function, and from that you can build out. And you'll see this, and when we say as above, so below, we might see these ideas in astrology, when the relationship between the planets is analogous to something that is happening on a lower level. And you can begin to develop an inductive hypothesis from these analogous connections. Okay, and so pure induction is founded on enumeration and statistics. John is a man and is dead. Peter is a man and is dead. Michael is a man and is dead. Therefore, men are mortal. The force of this argument is dependent on quantification. Okay, so, 3 men, they're all dead, therefore man is mortal. The method of analogy, on the other hand, requires something of qualitative, intrinsic importance. As an example, the author states this: Andrew is formed from matter, energy, and consciousness. As matter does not disappear with his death, but only changes its form, and as energy does not disappear, but only modifies the mode of its activity, Andrew's consciousness also cannot simply disappear, but merely must change its form and mode or plane of activity. Therefore, Andrew is immortal. This latter argument is founded on the formula of Hermes Trismegistus, that which is below, matter, energy, is as that which is above, consciousness. Now, if there exists a law of conservation of matter and energy, all through matter transforms itself into energy and vice versa, there must necessarily exist also a law of conservation of consciousness or immortality. So from in that understanding of matter and energy, the analogous positions of matter and energy of just changing their mode, Hermes Trismegistus and thus the author go forward and put forward this hypothesis in relation that the same thing must be happening with consciousness. And that's probably the most straightforward spiritual argument you'll get with the law of analogy. It's quite an intuitive methodology of doing things. So Keynes figured the ideal science would be one which could do away with pure induction and transform into pure analogy. It is by virtue of analogy that science makes its discoveries, passing from the known to the unknown. You view analogous things in the known, and then from this you can address the above. Analogy is its beginning and its end, its alpha and omega, on page 17. And so, to tie all this together, roughly, we think back to the discussion on symbols. We understand symbols as a signifier of a connection between the visible and the invisible. The cross is a symbol which is representative of the unknown of the above and the horizontal of the below. Analogy seizes the analogous facts of various phenomena and treats them to its own methodology, thus formulating various connections and hypotheses regarding sort of an intuitive, meditative learning and knowledge. Eventually, the author understands here that the method of analogy is akin to concentration without effort. Work has become play. Knowing how to know, learning how to learn has become play. Within the method of analogy, the cosmos becomes something which one delves into as a host of analogous information seeking to be revealed. It demands no effort, intellectually speaking, for either one sees analogous correspondence within the world or they do not. Truly I say to you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God like a child shall not enter it. Mark 15. The child does not work, he plays. The child does not put effort into his seeing. His attention is undivided. The world is as it is. The child's perception is immediately of correspondence. And so to finish. Page 20. The magician represents the man who has attained harmony and equilibrium between the spontaneity of the unconscious and the deliberate action of the conscious. His state of consciousness is the synthesis of the conscious and unconscious, of creative spontaneity and deliberately executed activity. His state of consciousness is the synthesis of the conscious and unconscious, of creative spontaneity and deliberately executed activity. Thank you all for listening. So, as I said, there's going to be 22 of these on every single letter of this book, and half are going to be for patrons, and the other half will be free. So this first one, obviously, will be free. So if this has interested you, then please find links in the description below where you can sign up to the Patreon, the $5 Patreon and up, and get access to the next ones. And also, all patrons will get access to my notes as well. Thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it, and any questions or anything like that, please email me. But see you all in the next one.